The beginning of Mem Aleph Amid Aleph, we're touching a few lines into the page, but just to review. What we said yesterday, the only thing you have to remember is from yesterday's Shita is Rav Huna. Rav Huna said that if you have your friend's animal lying on the floor and you shecht it, l'shem avodah zara, it's aser b'hana. Now, what was the chiddush in Rav Huna? I'm not getting into the details of how much you cut it, a little bit, but the concept. The concept of Rav Huna's mechadish is that even though there's a concept, ein adam oiser davar shein shaloi, which means I can't aser your item, but if I do a maisa to your item, I could. The last thing the Gemara had said was that there were opinions that disagreed. Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, and Rav Yitzchak all disagree. The only thing you have to know from today's daf is Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, and Rav Yitzchak all hold ein adam maisa davar shein shaloi. Meaning, even if you do a maisa, ein adam maisa davar shein shaloi. Therefore, what were they referencing? Again, they were referencing a case where I shecht my friend's animal l'shem avodah zara. They would say it's not asa b'hana because ein adam oiser davar shein shaloi. So it says the Gemara Tashema, Shnayim sheichtin, oichzin besakin b'sheichtin. The Mishnah says that if you have two people holding a knife, right, and we're both shechting at the same time, and I'm thinking avodah zara and you're not, the halach is that it's aser. Now, for some reason, the Gemara assumes that the person who's doing it l'shem avodah zara is not the owner. Meaning, the case is where it's me and Menashe, we're shechting Menashe's cow. I happen to be holding the knife at the same time as Menashe, and I think avodah zara. So the halacha is it's aser b'hana. But wait a minute. So it's aser. So the question is, but why? Why is it aser? We're assuming that the one who's shechting at l'shem avodah zara is not the owner. And you see, Adam Oser Davar Shein Shalo, so it's a raya, not like these Amaroim, because again, it's assuming the person who's holding the knife is not the owner. Says the Gemara, Shnaim, Osem Sak V'Sheichtin, Ech L'Shem Echad, Mekol Elu, L'Shem Davar Kasher, Shchitasei Psula, but why? The one who's shechting it, thinking about the Zara, is not the owner. So the Gemara says, he is the owner. Again, they believe Ein Adam Oser Davar Shein Shalo, which means you cannot ask something else, you own it. I, over here, you're asking and you don't own it. So the answer is, you do own it. Both people that are cutting the animal, me and Menashe, both own the animal. We're both shutzvim. Very easy answer. Gemara says, what about another one? It's a famous Gemara, it's a famous sugi in Baba Kama. Tashema hamatame. It's actually getting also. Hamatame, which means I go over and I contaminate your food. So you're a person, I'm tummy mace, I touch it. This is the concept of do I have to pay? So by contaminating your food, I definitely damaged it. I damaged it spiritually, but I damaged it. Or hamedame. Medame means I take truma and I mix it in with non-truma. So now you, as a non-kohen, can't eat it. And the last case is what we want to talk about. I go over to your wine, pashtus, the cases where I'm not the owner, you're the owner, and I do nisachayayin. Meaning, I do a wine libation. I take the wine and I pour it for avodah zara. What happens when you pour wine for avodah zara? It becomes aser. So by my action, I made your wine undrinkable. Now, pashtus, the case is, I'm not the owner, you're the owner. So what's the halacha? B'shoigig, if I did it accidentally, potter, I don't have to pay for any financial damage, but b'mezid chayiv. But if I did it on purpose, I have to pay. Now, forget about the details of shoigig mezid. B'kitzer, I go over to your wine, and I do nisachayayin on your wine, it asses your wine. I thought ein adam oser davar shein shalo. So says the Gemara, Hachanami dislei shutzis begava. This case as well, the person who's doing the nisachayayin is a partner. Meaning, the cases where I go over to Menashe's wine and I do nisachayayin, but the cases where me and Menashe are both partners in the wine. So that's why I'm able to aser it. But if I was not the partners, I would not be able to aser it. Okay, so you have this machlekes amiroyim, whether someone can aser someone else's item through an action. The truth is, Kitanoi, it's a machlekes tanoim. What's the machlekes tanoim? The oivei kechavim shenisach yeno shel Yisrael shaloi b'fnei oivei kechavim. You have a guy, not in front of an idol. Stam a bottle of wine over here, and he touches the wine, and he says that he shakes the wine, whatever it is, and he says he did that for avodah zara purposes. What is the status of the wine? Now, we're all obviously very, very used to the halacha that if a non-Jew touches wine, it makes the wine aser. But if you think about it, the non-Jew doesn't own your bottle of wine. So every case of a non-Jew asering the Jew's wine is a case of Adam Oser Davar Shein Shalo. So over here, he poured wine not in front of the idol for avodah zara purposes. So, asru, it's aser. Stop. This Tanakama obviously believes a person is capable of asering someone else's items. Therefore, a guy who does not own the wine can aser the wine. Comes Rav Yehuda ben Beseira, Rav Yehuda ben Baba, and they matirin. And they shnei dvarim. They matter it for two reasons. I'll say it out so you said. First of all, they tell you just practically, don't believe him. He says he did it for avodah zarah. They would not pour wine libations unless the idol was present. Just practically, he knew their getchkas, he knew their hanhagas, and meaning in other words, they believe that he's just messing with you. He says he did it for avodah zarah. They said, well, is the idol there? No, they would not pour libations unless the idol was present. But secondarily, and more importantly for our discussion, a person cannot aser someone else's items. So the guy who doesn't own the wine cannot aser the wine. So you see that it's a machlokes tanoim. They're matter b'shnei dvarim. Echad she'im asking out b'vei. First of all, they only pour libations in front of the idol, and over here the idol's not here, so therefore obviously they were not pouring libations. They said they did, so they're messing with you. And the second reason is you could tell him, who are you that you could aser my wine? Meaning, in other words, ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo. Now, we started this discussion of Adam Osa Davar She'eino Shelo, Ein Adam Osa Davar She'eino Shelo because of yesterday. The case was, you have an animal, your animal, I shechte for Avodah Zarah, Rav Nachman, Rav Yitzchak, and Rav Amram all say the animal's kosher. Why? Because you can't aser someone else's items. Okay, fair. We just got finished saying this concept of whether a person is able to aser someone else's items is a machlokas tanoim. So, works out well. We had a machlokas amaroim yesterday. We have a machlokas today in Tanoim. Beautiful. Comes Rav Nachman and Rav Amram and Rav Yitzchak, and they say the following. They say like this: even if you believe generally a person could aser someone else's item, let's say you hold like those Tanoim, still in this case it's going to be allowed. Again, what's this case? I go over to Menashe's. I'm a Jew, from Jew seemingly. You're a Jew. I go over to your cow and I shecht it and I say I'm doing it l'shem Buddha, whatever. So the halacha is, they say it's mutter. Why? Because ein adam oser davar she'eino shelo. Then they add, even if you generally hold adam oser davar she'eino shelo, but in this case not. Why? Because in this case we say to ourselves, what's the likelihood that a Jew is doing avodah zarah? What type of Jew would do avodah zarah? The stomach he's messing with you. Meaning, in other words, they believe that even if you hold generally adam oser davar she'eino shelo, when you're dealing with Jews and idolatry, it's so rare for Jews to do idolatry, you don't believe them. Even though he says he's doing it for Avodah Zarah, we don't believe him. Now, by the way, I will point this out. If you know, the Gemara is going to clarify, if you know he's someone who does do Avodah Zarah from past experience, then you should believe him. But the case is where I'm just showing up, I'm a random Orthodox Jew, you have no idea anything about me, I just say I shechted it for Avodah Zarah. There's two options. Either I'm telling you the truth, or it's a very elaborate prank. I'm really a sheichet, and I thought it was funny. Says Rav Nachman, Rav Amram, Rav Yitzchak, they say it's all mutter. Why? First of all, ain't adam oser davar she'eino shelo. But even if you hold adam oser davar she'eino shelo, we don't believe him. Now, if again, just to clarify, there are cases throughout Shas where a Jew does avodah zarah, and we do believe him. The answer is, in all those cases, we have previous information that he's someone who does idolatry. In this case, I just show up out of the blue. You have no knowledge of me doing idolatry in the past. I say I did avodah zarah. It's a prank. It would not be avodah zarah, not a case of avodah zarah. Stam, I don't know. A guy does avodah zarah. A guy can do avodah zarah, or a Jew who's Isaac and avodah zarah does avodah zarah, or other case of other. I can't think of other case of other because usually it's avodah zarah based. Muksan Shabbos, by the way. I put Muksan your items, whatever. That's only true with a guy. But with a Jew, Jews don't do avodah zarah. He says he did avodah zarah. He's trying to mess with you. He's causing you tsar, meaning he knows that you're a guy who sweats the small stuff, and he thinks it's funny. We don't believe him. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. Tashima shnayim oichsim besakin b'shaychtin echel l'shem echel mekolelu v'echel l'shem davar kasher shchitas psula. But doesn't the Mishnah say that if two people are holding the knife, me and Menashe are shechting at the same time, and I say I'm doing it for avodah zarah, the answer, the animal's aser. Why don't you say the same thing? I'm just messing with you. I thought I'm just messing with you. So says the Gemara, I told you before, hachamay of Yisrael mummer. That's talking specifically about a case where we know the Jew did avodah zarah in the past, so we believe him. The case of Rav Yitzchak and Rav Nachman and Rav Amram is where the Jew is showing up randomly. We don't have any information. But if you know that he's Isaac and avodah zarah, then he's not messing with you. It's not a prank. Then it's real. Tashima. The brisa we just Mishnah quoted before. The halach is that if I, as a Jew, go over to your wine and I pour it as a libation for an avodah zarah, it's aser. But why? I thought he's messing with you. Same answer. Hachanami sol momer. That's also talking about a case where the Jew has already proven to have done avodah zarah in the past. But if not, we can believe it's a prank. Amr le Rav Acha berei the Rav Rav Ashi hisu by the kibul of asra mai. Here's the shaila. What's the halachas if I were to ask you, according to when avodah zarah with a Jew, according to Rav Nachman, Rav Amra, Rav Yitzchak, they would say, if he's done avodah zarah in the past, then we believe him. If he has not, then he's pranking you. What if I've been officially warned not to do avodah zarah? I never did it, but clearly the Rabbanim were concerned, or I was going to do it, and I was officially warned, and they said to me, if you do avodah zarah, you know you're going to get the death penalty. And I said, I understand. I never did it, but I was officially warned, and then I do it. Meaning, and then I say to you, I shechted your cow for avodah zarah. Do you say that it's a prank because I never was officially caught with doing avodah zarah? On the other hand, I definitely did smoke already because I've been warned in the past. I was warned in the past not to do avodah zarah, but in this case not. But the point is, so do we? No, but the point is, I was warned in the past. So the question is, is it still a prank? I never did avodah zarah, but I was warned. So a person is willing to take a warning. You know what happens when you're warned? That means that if you do the action, you're going to get the death penalty. He's willing to take a warning for avodah zarah. He's not messing anymore. He's clearly someone who's, once you're warned in public in front of two witnesses not to avodah zarah, and you say, I accept the warning and I know the consequences, we're past the prank time period. And therefore, if he were to say that he shechted a cow for avodah zarah purposes, it would taka asa the cow. We believe him. Okay, new topic. This has to do with, this Mishnah takes us to the next Mishnah. It's not a very difficult Mishnah. And that is, there were certain things you're not allowed to do because it looks like avodah zarah. So, ein sheichtin loy l'tech yamim. Basically, it's like this. When you shecht a cow, it makes a lot of mess. You don't want to do it in your living room. So they would want to do it over water. That way it just goes into the water. You're not allowed to shecht an animal over the ocean, or over a river, or into kalim. Now what this means is like this. You can't shecht it over a body of water because people think that you're doing it for the water gods. Even though you're doing it just because you don't want to make a mess, but it looks bad. By the way, so you say, okay, I'll put it in a tub. It'll catch all the blood. No good either, because it looks like you want the blood for avodah zarah. Because who else would want blood? But you're allowed to slaughter into a pit of water, meaning not a body of water. You just have in the backyard. You have like a shtickle, like a well or something, some sort of pit of water. That's fine, because there's no god of a pit of water. A body of water, a river, an ocean. That's a problem. Ubesvina. Now let's say it's on the ocean. I'm on the boat. Here's my issue. I'm on the boat. I want to shecht a cow. I got two choices. I want to do it over the water, but you told me I can't. So you have to do it in the boat. You know how gross it is to sit in a kayak full of blood? And I can't put it into kalim. Right? I can't do it over water. I can't do it in kalim. The only option is normally over the dirt. But I'm on a boat. So here's the halacha. Svina al gabi kalim. But the svina, here's what you do. The way Rashi explains is basically you build some sort of flat surface. You shecht it over the blood, and then it spills into the water. It eventually gets to the water, but you're not doing it directly over the water. So because it's not directly over the water, you shecht it on the boat, but over like a ramp, so that the blood spills into the water. So you're not doing it over the water, but the blood goes to the water. Because it's not directly over the water, it doesn't look like avodah zarah, and that's the eitzah. Ein sheichten leguma kalikar. Apparently another thing. Apparently the tzedukim had this thing where they would shecht over an empty pit. That was their thing. They would take an animal, shecht over an empty pit. They would dig a pit, shecht over the empty pit. That was the tzeduki's process. So, ein sheichten leguma kalikar. You're not allowed to do that because it looks like avodah zarah. But you can make a pit in your house. Obvious question is, you just told me not to do a pit. Now you're telling me to do a pit. So the Gemara is going to explain there's a difference between a pit in your house and a pit in the street. But in the street you can't make a pit at all. Go to the next page. Because it looks like you're following the ways of the tzedukim. Okay. So the Mishnah started off by saying you can't do a shechita over a body of water because it looks like you're doing it to the water gods. But you're allowed to do it over a small gathering of water, like a small little pit of water. Says the Gemara, why is it that you can't shecht over a body of water because it looks like you're shechting to the water gods? So then there should be a problem over a small pit of water. You can say, well, there's no water gods by a pit of water. Yeah, but you know what happens when water sits? It reflects. It looks like you're shechting to your own reflection. And that should be a problem of Avodah Zarah. Amr libabua kashachit. So the Gemara says, Amr Rava bakurim shanu. You're right. Rava says it's only allowed if it's murky waters, so you don't have a proper reflection. So it doesn't look like you're shechting to your own reflection. The Mishnah is a little bit unclear because it says regarding the tzedukim, they would dig a pit and shecht over it. So the Mishnah starts off by saying you can't. Then the Mishnah says, but you're allowed to in the house. And then the Mishnah says, but not in the street. What's the flow? Says the Gemara, you start off by saying you're not allowed to shecht it all over any pit, but then you said you're allowed to do it in a house. So what's going on? Very simple. The first line of the Mishnah is you're not allowed to shecht over a pit in the street. Then it's saying, but over the house is fine. Here's the issue though. It starts off by saying you're not allowed to shecht over a pit, any pit. Then it says the house is fine, and then it says, but not in the street. So if you tell me the first line is a street, so it's street no good, house good, street no good, it's repeating itself. It says the Gemara, the Rabbi says this is how you're supposed to read the Mishnah. You're not allowed to shecht over any pit in the street at all. But let's say you want to keep your street clean. Kate said, what do you do? In other words, like this. You're never allowed to shecht directly over a pit. Ever. Even in the house or in the street. That you're not allowed to do. What happens if you want to make your house, you don't want to make your house messy? Here's what you do. You shecht near the pit so that the blood trickles into the pit. So it doesn't go directly into the pit, it goes on the side and streams down. That's allowed because it's not exactly what the Stukim said, and therefore in order to keep cleanliness, they allow it. But you're not allowed to do that in the marketplace. In the marketplace, b'chol ikar, meaning in the marketplace, you're not allowed to shech near the pit and have the blood trickle into the pit because publicly Chazal were strict. Tanya Kavase de Rava, the Brisa backs up Rava. There's a Brisa that says, Hayimahalach Besvina, if you're going on a boat, then you have no place on the boat to shecht. So you can't shecht in the water because that's a problem. You can't shecht over a kalim because that's a problem. So what do? You shecht the animal over the side of the boat so that the blood trickles from the side of the boat into the water. Then the Brisa continues, and this is relevant for our discussion. You're never allowed to shecht directly into a pit. But if you want to keep your backyard clean, so what do? You make a ramp outside of the guma, meaning you shecht directly outside of the guma, and then the blood will trickle into the guma. But that's only true in your house. But in a market, you can't do that at all, because publicly we don't allow you even to shecht it outside of the pit and have it trickle into the pit. That's no good. And if someone does this, you got to check his ichus, because he's acting like the tzedukim. Okay, 5 more minutes. What we'll do is like this. New Mishnah will take us into the parak. Let me just explain the Mishnah, and then it's super simple. I have a cow. I'm living in New York. I'm not by the Beis HaMikdash. It's not a karban. But I'm a funny person. I think I'm funny. I take the cow and I say, this is a chatas shecht. Is that a problem? It's not a chatas. I never consecrated it as a chatas. I'm just saying it's a chatas. I think it's funny. It's a problem. Chazal were not happy about that. When I say chatas, you say a karban. Chazal were not happy about that. Why? As you can imagine, it looks like you're shechting a karban outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Chazal were super not happy about it. Here's the rule though. Chazal were only strict when it legitimately looks like a karban outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Therefore, only a karban that's optional. I'll tell you why. If Menashe comes over and he says, I'm shechting an optional shlomim in my backyard. Everyone, WhatsApp, everyone come by for a party. I'm shechting an optional shlomim. That looks bad. Why? Because an optional shlomim, it could be an optional shlomim. It's legitimately a problem. However, if he says, I'm shechting a chatas, it's fine. Why? Chatas are not optional. Chatas are due to sins. If he taka was chayav chatas, I would know about it. Apparently, people did sin so infrequently, and bringing a carbon was such a to-do, I would know about it if you were obligated to bring a carbon. Infrequently, yeah. No, Baruch Hashem, so the point is, if he says he's shechting a chatas in his backyard, everyone's like, it's not a chatas, come on. I would know if he had to bring a chatas. If it's an obligatory carbon, it's fine. If it's an optional carbon, it's a problem. You understand that? Obligatory problem, a carbon is fine because if it was taking obligation, I would know about it, and everyone knows that he's just messing around. But if it was an optional carbon, that's a problem because optional carbonos taka look like it's a carbon. Let's just read inside. The Mishnah says, "Hashochet l'shem ola." If you shechten a carbon, if you shechten an animal, not a carbon, you say an animal, you're shechting it for the ola's sake, and olas are optional, or l'shem zvachim, or any other shlamim. L'shem Asham Talui, for Asham Talui. Now, Asham Taluis are not optional. The Gemara will point that out. L'shem Pesach, a carbon Pesach, also not optional. The Gemara will point that out. L'shem Toda, optional Toda, Shchita Psula. We invalidate the carbon. Why? Invalidate the Shchita. Why? Because it looks really bad. Rav Shimon Mashav, Rav Shimon says it's fine. Rav Shimon is not concerned about the optics. Shnai Ma'asim Besakin. This is always the halacha. Anytime you have an invalid thought, if two people are shechting an animal and one person has an invalid thought, it also invalidates it. Shnaim Sheichim Besakin V'Shechtin Echad L'Shom Echem Ekolelu V'Echad L'Shom Davar Kasha Shchitas Psula. Oh, but that's only true that it's a problem when it's an optional carbon because the taka looks like maybe he taka has an optional carbon, but an obligatory carbonus everyone know about, so everyone knows he's messing. Hashoch L'Shem Chatas, which is obligatory. L'Shem Asham Vadai, which is obligatory. L'Shem Bechar, which is obligatory. L'Shem Meiser, obligatory in that you it's not optional. It's just every 10th animal is Meiser. L'Shem Tzmura, a Tzmura is not an option. You're not supposed to make a Tzmura. All of these things, Shchidas Kshera. Why? Because if Itaka was true, I would know about it. Obligatory carbonos, people are made aware of. Zeh HaKlal, the Mishnah just reiterates it. This is the rule. Kol davar shenidav v'nidav. Anytime an animal is being slaughtered for the sake of a carbon that is optional, aser. Even though you're messing with us, Chazal asered it. But she'ena nidav v'nidav. But if you're slaughtering an animal for the sake of an obligatory carbon, kosher. The Gemara just speaks it out. One of the cases of an optional carbon that it listed, that being an issue, there were two carbonos that were listed amongst the optional carbonos as being an issue. One was an Asham Vadai, Asham Tali. Is an Asham Tali an optional carbon? I'm not going to put you guys on the spot, but an Asham Tali is when you are not sure whether you're chayav a carbon, you're chayav a chatas. It's not an option. Asham Tali is one of these pieces of chazar, I don't know which one. It's called an Asham Tali. It's not an optional, so why are you calling it optional? Says the Gemara, Asham Tali bar nidav and nidavu. Rav Yochanan hamani Rav Elazar. This follows the view of Rav Elazar. The Amr misnadav the Asham Tali b'chol yoyim. Rav Elazar taka holds that Asham Tali is optional. It's not for now, but Rav Elazar taka holds that it's optional, and it follows Rav Elazar. Pesach bar nidav and nidavu. Then the next case in the Mishnah of optional carbonos was a carbon Pesach. Is the carbon Pesach optional? Again, Menashe comes over and he says, "Oh, I'm slaughtering an animal carbon Pesach in middle of July." It's a problem. It's not optional. Everyone knows he's messing around. Says the Gemara, Zimana Kavia. Rav Oishi Ashani Pesach Hoil for Kulu. The difference is that about a carbon Pesach, because everyone had to bring a carbon Pesach, people were mafresh it throughout the year. Right? Whenever you got a really good animal that's like age appropriate, you'd be like, "Oh, this is going to be my carbon Pesach this year." So it is possible that he might have a carbon Pesach in his backyard, even though it's in the middle of July, and even though it's not optional. People were always thinking about the carbon Pesach, so it's possible that he actually has a carbon Pesach in his backyard, and therefore Chazal asered it. Rav Yanai says again, the whole issue is that if he's shechting a carbon and he's saying it's shechting an animal, he's saying it's a carbon, that is a bad optics because it looks like it's a carbon. Says the Gemara, Loishan el Tamimim. This is only true if it's an unblemished animal. Avle Bali Mumin. If the animal's missing a leg, it's clearly not a carbon. He's obviously messing with us. Made the yadi. Rav Yochanan says, no, afilu bali mumin nami, even bali mumin it's a problem. Zimnin derami lemidi amum v'yada, because sometimes mumin are not noticeable. I go to Menashe's house for a party, I'm supposed to know that the animal had a cataract. Come on. So therefore, it's still a bad optic. Now, but if it's obligatory carbonos, it's fine, because obligatory carbonos everyone knows about, so everyone knows that he's messing around. It's not a carbon. Rav Yochanan, Loshan. Okay, so what was the case? I'm using Menashe in this case, sorry. You shecht a carbon, you're saying, I'm shechting a chatas in my backyard. So it says the Mishnah, it's fine. Why? Because I know he's not chayv chatas. Trust me, I would know if Menashe knew chayv chatas. Chayv chatas is a big deal. What happens if you actually are chayv chatas? What if a week before you ate chaylev and you taka are chayv chatas? So then it's a really bad optic. So it says the Gemara, Rav Yochanan lo shana l'shemu chayav chatas. This concept that if he says he's doing it for a chatas, everyone's like, he's messing with us. That's when he's not obligated a chatas. But if he's taka obligated a chatas in the past, then it's a terrible optic. Says the Gemara, wait a minute, but he didn't say he's shechting it l'shem chatasi. He said he's shechting it as a chatas. If Itaka was chayv a chatas in the past, it would only be a problem if he said, I'm shechting it to fulfill my chatas, chatasi. Says the Gemara, haloi kamer l'shem chatasi, but Menashe didn't say that he's shechting it for my chatas. He just said that he's shechting it for a chatas. And if you're telling me it's an issue when he had a chatas in the past, he should have to say it's for my chatas. The Gemara says, you're right. Amar avo v'oim l'shem chatasi. The cases where Hitaka said that he's chayiv, that he's doing it for his chatas. Good. Temura. Temura means that if you have a carbon and then you try to transfer the holiness onto another animal, it doesn't work, and they're both holy. So said the Gemara, that's not an issue because everyone knows that there's no temura there. Rabbi Lazar, the Gemara speaks it out. Rabbi Lazar says, Lo yishanu ala she'ein lo yizevach b'tech be'isai. The whole concept that the temura does not apply, that everyone thinks that he's joking, is where he does not have a carbon in his house. So he can't have a temura. But if Itaka has a carbon in his house, like Mr. Lorge has an oila, and then he says, oh, this animal is a temura. It's not such a joke because he has an oil in his house, so he legitimately might have a temura. Then it's an issue. Says the Gemara, haloika amar l'shem temuras zivchi, but shouldn't he have to say temuras zivchi, my temura? So says the Gemara, you're right. Amar v'amar l'shem temuras zivchi. That's what the case is where he said that he's doing it for my temura. Good. The Mishnah said this rule of optional karbanos as opposed to obligatory carbon. Then the Mishnah ended it off by saying zeh haklal and repeats it. Anytime the Mishnah says zeh klal and repeats the klal, it's adding something. Says the Gemara, lasuye mai, lasuye oilas nozir. Demau desema, haloi nodar, ema nodar b'tzina. The case is, my father says, oh, hey, guys, everyone get together. I'm shechting a carbon for my naziris. The halacha is, that's a problem. Why? Because naziris is optional. That's what the Mishnah is alluding to. What's the chiddush? You might think that if he was a nazir, wouldn't I know about it? Right? You say that you're shechting your animal as a nazir because it's a carbon of nazir. It's a problem. Why? Because naziris is optional. Legitimately might be so. It's a bad optic. Says the Gemara. The chiddush is you might think if he was taka nazir, everyone would know about it. Kamash malon, he might be doing a bitzina. Maybe that's why he doesn't get haircuts. Right? That is a bitzina. Right? Maybe a bitzina. Says the Gemara. But and then the Mishnah said, but if it's obligatory, it's not an issue. What was that referring to? Is adding a woman a yoledas, meaning. Reuven says, I'm shechting a carbon as a carbon of a yoledes. The halacha is, a yoledes is an obligatory carbon. Obviously, it's not true. But says the Gemara, Amar Rav Elazar, Loit shanu el shein leisha. That's only true if he doesn't have a wife who just gave birth. But forget about it. If he's single, but if he has a wife, maybe it is a yoledes. Maybe he's talking for his wife's carbon. Says the Gemara, but then wouldn't he have to say, for my wife's carbon as a yoled, it's not for my carbon? So you're right. That's the case. So he has a wife, and he's saying, I'm shechting this animal as a carbon for my wife's, she just gave birth. So that legitimately might be so. Then it's a problem. Says the Gemara, what's the chiddush? The chiddush is, you might say, if he had a daughter, wouldn't I know about it? Kamash Malon, no. Sometimes people give birth without publicizing it. Says the Gemara, Pshita, Ma'u desema, im isa diyalda kala havale. You might think that if his wife gave birth, everyone would know about it. Kamash Malon, Eimar apuli apple. Unfortunately, an onlooker might say that she miscarried, meaning it's possible that she could have miscarried. Right? You have to bring a carbon. Let's say she gave birth and the baby died. So when he says he's bringing carbon for yoledes, maybe it's true. You'll say, wait a minute, I didn't hear about the birthday party, I didn't hear about the big thing. The answer is nebuch. Maybe you'll say that Shistaka miscarried. So because it's a possibility that it's actually true, then therefore it's going to invalidate the animal. Hadran halach ha-shoichet.